The snow fell quietly on the streets outside Francis Tower as James Francis stepped out of his evening board meeting. At 37, he'd grown accustomed to these late nights, the endless negotiations that built his commercial development empire. His dark hair was touched with early flecks of silver. His tailored black coat, a shield against both the cold and the world. Success had come early for James, but it had cost him something he was only beginning to understand he'd lost. He was reaching for his phone to call his driver when he heard a small voice, barely audible above the whisper of falling snow. "Excuse me, sir." James looked down to find a little girl sitting in a wheelchair on the sidewalk, no more than 7 years old. She had long, flowing dark hair escaping from beneath a worn knit cap, her cheeks flushed pink from the cold. She wore a teal puffy coat that had seen better days, gray leggings visible beneath, and her small hands gripped the armrests of her wheelchair with white-knuckled intensity. The wheelchair itself looked well used, its wheels caked with slush. Her blue eyes were wide with an emotion James recognized immediately as fear. "Are you lost, sweetheart?" he asked, crouching down to her level. The sidewalk was cold beneath his knees. Dampness seeped through his expensive trousers, but he didn't notice. The little girl's lower lip trembled. "Sir, my mom never woke up." The words hit James like a physical blow. His face turned pale, all the color draining from his complexion. "What do you mean she never woke up?" he whispered, his voice barely steady. "Where is she?" "At home. I tried and tried, but she wouldn't open her eyes. She's on the floor by the couch." Tears began sliding down the child's round cheeks, leaving glistening tracks in the dim streetlight. "I got scared. I remembered she said, 'If there's ever an emergency, find help.' So I put on my coat and came outside in my chair, but everyone just walked past me. They looked at my wheelchair and looked away." James's mind raced, years of executive decision-making kicking into focus, but this was different. This wasn't a boardroom crisis. "What's your name, honey?" "Aurelia. Aurelia Davis." "Okay, Aurelia. I'm James. Can you show me where you live? Can you take me to your mom?" The little girl nodded, and when James stood and moved behind her wheelchair, gripping the handles, she didn't protest. She trusted him. That trust made James's chest tighten with something he hadn't felt in years, the weight of someone depending on him, truly depending on him. "Show me now," he said quietly, his hands firm on the wheelchair handles. She pointed down the street, and together they moved through the falling snow. James pushed the wheelchair carefully, feeling the resistance of the wheels against the accumulating powder, into a neighborhood that grew progressively shabbier. The elegant storefronts of the financial district gave way to older buildings, some with broken windows, others with sagging steps and rusted fire escapes. They stopped in front of a narrow brownstone that had been divided into apartments. Aurelia pulled a key on a string from inside her coat, her fingers fumbling with the lock. James helped her, his hand steady despite the fear coursing through him, and together they entered the building. The snow fell quietly on the streets outside Francis Tower as James Francis stepped out of his evening board meeting. At 37, he'd grown accustomed to these late nights, the endless negotiations that built his commercial development empire. His dark hair was touched with early flecks of silver. His tailored black coat, a shield against both the cold and the world. Success had come early for James, but it had cost him something he was only beginning to understand he'd lost. The glass doors of his headquarters slid shut behind him with a whisper, sealing away the warmth and the fluorescent certainty of spreadsheets and profit margins. Out here, the world felt different. Softer. More dangerous somehow. He was reaching for his phone to call his driver, already mentally reviewing the acquisition proposal he'd review over dinner, when he heard it. A small voice, barely audible above the whisper of falling snow. "Excuse me, sir." James looked down to find a little girl sitting in a wheelchair on the sidewalk, no more than 7 years old. She had long, flowing dark hair escaping from beneath a worn knit cap, her cheeks flushed pink from the cold. She wore a teal puffy coat that had seen better days, grey leggings visible beneath, and her small hands gripped the armrests of her wheelchair with white-knuckled intensity. The wheelchair itself looked well used, its wheels caked with slush and snow. Her blue eyes were wide with an emotion James recognized immediately as fear. For a moment, he froze. The instinct was there, immediate and shameful. Call building security. Call social services. Call someone whose job it was to handle things like this. His driver would be here in 3 minutes. He had dinner reservations at 8. He had emails waiting, contracts that needed signatures before morning. Are you lost, sweetheart? The words came out before he decided to speak them. He crouched down to her level, feeling the cold sidewalk beneath his knees. Dampness seeped through his expensive trousers, but he didn't notice. Up close, he could see the tear tracks on her cheeks, the way her lower lip trembled despite her obvious effort to be brave. Sir, my mom never woke up. Her voice broke on the last word. Please, I need help. The words hit James like a physical blow. His face turned pale, all the color draining from his complexion. Time seemed to slow, to crystallize around this moment. Behind him, his driver pulled up to the curb, the town car's engine purring quietly. James didn't turn around. What do you mean she never woke up? He whispered, his voice barely steady. Where is she? At home. I tried and tried, but she wouldn't open her eyes. She's on the floor by the couch. Tears began sliding down the child's round cheeks, leaving glistening tracks in the dim streetlight. I got scared. I remembered she said, if there's ever an emergency, find help. So I put on my coat and came outside in my chair, but everyone just walked past me. She looked up at him, and in her eyes James saw something that made his chest tighten. Not just fear. Not just desperation. But a terrible, brave determination that reminded him of someone he'd tried very hard to forget. His mother, all those years ago, told him to be strong even when she was the one who needed strength. They looked at my wheelchair, the little girl continued, her voice small but steady, and they looked away. James's mind raced, years of executive decision-making kicking into focus, but this was different. This wasn't a boardroom crisis. This wasn't about market share or quarterly projections. This was life and death, and it was happening right now, in the snow, on his doorstep. His phone buzzed. The driver stepped out of the car, approaching. The restaurant reservation notification flashed on his screen. James looked at all of it, at his carefully constructed evening, his carefully constructed life, and then he looked back down at the little girl in the wheelchair. What's your name, honey? Aurelia. Aurelia Davis. Okay, Aurelia. I'm James. He stood, moving behind her wheelchair, his hands finding the handles. They were cold, slightly damp from the snow. Can you show me where you live? Can you take me to your mom? The little girl nodded, and when she didn't pull away, when she let him take control of her chair, James felt something shift inside him. That trust made his chest tighten with something he hadn't felt in years, the weight of someone depending on him, truly depending on him. Show me now, he said quietly. She pointed down the street, her small hand trembling, and together they moved into the falling snow. The wheelchair fought him from the first push. James had imagined it would glide, smooth and effortless like the rolling chairs in his conference rooms, but the reality was immediate and humbling. The wheels caught in the accumulating snow, stuttered over cracks in the sidewalk he'd never noticed before, resisted every forward motion as if the city itself was designed to push back. Left at the corner, Aurelia said quietly, her voice small against the wind. James adjusted his grip, his expensive leather gloves already soaked through. Behind them, the twin tracks of the wheelchair carved a path through the fresh powder, a record of their passage. He looked back once and felt something cold settle in his stomach that had nothing to do with the weather. She'd made this journey alone. This child had navigated these streets, in the dark, in the snow, in a wheelchair, while everyone else was heading home to warm apartments and hot dinners. They passed his driver, still standing beside the town car, confusion written across his face. James didn't stop to explain. What would he even say? The sleek towers of the financial district rose behind them like glass monuments to a world that suddenly felt very far away. With each push of the wheelchair, James felt that distance growing. "How far is it?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady, not wanting her to hear the strain already building in his shoulders. 4 more blocks. Aurelia's hands had tightened on the armrests. "I'm sorry it's so far. I'm sorry I'm heavy." "You're not heavy," James said quickly, but the words felt inadequate. She wasn't heavy. The wheelchair wasn't heavy. What was heavy was the understanding slowly crushing down on him, that this was her life every single day. Every errand, every trip to school, every journey requiring someone else's strength, someone else's time, someone else's willingness to see her as worth the effort. The neighborhood changed around them. The pristine storefronts with their tasteful window displays gave way to bodegas with bars on the windows, to older buildings with peeling paint and sagging stoops. The streetlights became more sporadic, leaving pools of shadow between circles of yellow light. James had driven through neighborhoods like this 1,000 times, usually on his way to somewhere else, usually on his phone, barely registering the transition from wealth to working poverty. But pushing Aurelia's wheelchair through the snow made it impossible not to notice. The sidewalks here weren't cleared as promptly. The curb cuts were cracked or non-existent, forcing him to angle the wheelchair carefully, to feel the jarring bump as they navigated down to street level and back up again. His hands were freezing now, his shoulders burning, his breath coming harder than he'd ever admit. "That building," Aurelia said, pointing to a narrow brownstone ahead. "Third one down." James pushed harder, feeling the wheels slip slightly on the icy concrete. Sweat had formed beneath his expensive coat despite the cold, and his arms trembled slightly from the unfamiliar exertion. 4 blocks. She'd traveled 4 blocks alone, in this. "You're very brave," he said, the words feeling too small even as he spoke them. Aurelia didn't respond for a moment. When she did, her voice was so quiet he almost missed it over the sound of wheels on snow. "I was scared the whole time. I kept thinking I'd get stuck, or fall out, or someone bad would find me. But Mama needed help." She turned her head slightly, looking up at him. "So I went anyway." James felt something crack open inside his chest, something that had been frozen for so long he'd forgotten it was there. This child understood courage better than anyone in his boardroom ever had. Courage wasn't the absence of fear. It was doing what needed to be done despite the terror, despite the obstacles, despite everyone looking away. They reached the brownstone, and James pulled the wheelchair to a stop at the base of a small ramp, itself covered in snow. His hands were shaking now, from cold and exertion and something else entirely. "Here," Aurelia said simply, pulling the key on a string from inside her coat. James looked at the building, then down at the girl who'd led him here, and understood with perfect clarity that nothing in his life had prepared him for what he was about to face. James helped Aurelia with the key, his numb fingers fumbling where hers had been steady. The door opened into a narrow hallway, surprisingly clean, with a wheelchair ramp leading up to the first landing. They climbed slowly, James pushing from behind, feeling each incline as a new challenge. 2 flights up, Aurelia directed him to apartment 3B. The door was unlocked. The apartment was small, maybe 500 square feet total, But even in his panic, James registered the care with which it had been arranged. Wide pathways between furniture for the wheelchair. Grab bars visible through the bathroom doorway. Everything at reachable heights. And there, just as Aurelia had said, a woman lay motionless on the floor beside the couch. James rushed forward, his executive training fighting against the surge of fear. He dropped to his knees beside her, fingers finding her neck, searching for a pulse. It was there, faint but steady. The woman was young, maybe 30, with light brown hair pulled back in a braid. Even unconscious, James could see the delicate features, the exhaustion etched into her face. Her skin was pale, too pale, and when he touched her forehead, it burned with fever. "Grace," Aurelia whispered from her wheelchair, her composure finally cracking. "Her name is Grace Whitmore. That's my mama." James pulled out his phone, his hand shaking as he dialed 911. While he spoke to the dispatcher, giving the address with a steadiness he didn't feel, his eyes took in the details of the room. A stack of medical bills on the small kitchen table, all marked past due in aggressive red letters. An empty prescription bottle on the counter, the label showing it had been filled 3 months ago. A large wall calendar covered in careful handwriting, shift schedules written in blue, Aurelia's therapy appointments in green, overlapping and crowding each other until there were some days with 4 or 5 separate time slots marked. "She needs her emergency information," Aurelia said, her voice suddenly calm with a composure that broke James's heart. "It's in the red folder, on the shelf by the TV. It has her medications and her doctor's number and my medical stuff too." James found the folder exactly where she'd indicated, opened it with trembling hands. Inside, everything was meticulously organized: medication lists, insurance cards, therapy schedules, emergency contacts. He relayed the information to the dispatcher, learning that Grace was diabetic, that she'd been managing a chronic condition while working as a physical therapist at a care facility across town. The paramedics were coming. 5 minutes away. James looked around the apartment again, really seeing it this time. Physical therapy equipment in the corner, resistance bands, a small therapy table, adaptive tools he couldn't name. Photos on the wall showing Grace and Aurelia alone. Birthday parties, holidays, first days of school. Always just the two of them. Grace smiling despite the visible exhaustion, Aurelia beaming from her wheelchair. On the refrigerator, a work schedule held up with magnets. Double shifts marked in red, sometimes 3 in a row. Beside it, a grocery list with items crossed out, rewritten, crossed out again. Budgeting in real time. Choosing between necessities. "She works so hard," Aurelia said quietly. "She works all the time so I can have my therapy and my school and my wheelchair that fits right. She says I'm worth it. She says I'm worth everything." James looked at the medical bills, at the impossible calendar, at the empty prescription bottle. Grace had been rationing her own medication. She'd been working herself to exhaustion, double and triple shifts, sacrificing her own health to give her daughter everything she needed. And tonight, her body had simply given out. "The medicine for her diabetes," James said, his voice rough. "Where is it?" "She ran out last week. She said she'd refill it on Friday when she got paid." Aurelia's voice was small again. "But she kept feeling worse and I kept asking her to stay home, but she said we needed the money for my new leg braces and—" Her composure finally shattered. Tears streamed down her cheeks, and James moved to her wheelchair, kneeling beside her, taking her small cold hand in his. "You did everything right," he told her, his own voice breaking. "You saved her life tonight, Aurelia. You were so brave, and you did everything exactly right." Through the window, red and blue lights began to flash, painting the small apartment in emergency colors. The paramedics were here. Help was coming. But as James held Aurelia's hand and looked at Grace unconscious on the floor, Surrounded by the evidence of her solitary struggle, he understood that this was only the beginning. The real emergency had been happening for years, silent and desperate, and tonight was just the moment it finally became impossible to ignore. Loving this story? Hit that like button. Want more? Subscribe now. Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Now, back to the story. The paramedics moved with practiced efficiency, their questions rapid-fire and clinical. James stepped back, still holding Aurelia's hand, as they worked. He watched them check Grace's vital signs, saw the concern that flashed across the lead paramedic's face, heard the medical terminology he didn't fully understand being radioed to the hospital. Cardiac distress. Possible heart failure. Patient is diabetic, insulin dependent. Blood pressure critically low. Not diabetic shock. Worse. Her heart was failing. How long has she been like this? The paramedic asked, looking at James. I don't know. We just found her. James glanced down at Aurelia, whose face had gone very pale. Her daughter came to find help. The paramedic's expression softened for just a moment as she looked at Aurelia. You did good, sweetheart. You saved your mom's life tonight. They loaded Grace onto a stretcher, her body limp and small beneath the blankets. James found himself making decisions without thinking, his executive instincts taking over even as his heart raced. He gave the paramedics all the information from the red folder, promised to follow in his car, then realized the problem. The wheelchair wouldn't fit in his town car, not easily. I'll call another vehicle, he started to say. But Aurelia's grip on his hand tightened almost painfully. Please don't leave me. Her voice was barely a whisper. Please don't make me go with strangers. Everyone always wants to take me away from Mama and I can't. I'm not leaving you, James said, surprised by the fierce certainty in his own voice. We're going together. We're staying together. He ended up riding in the ambulance, Aurelia's wheelchair secured beside the bench where he sat, her hand locked in his. The siren wailed as they raced through the snowy streets, and James watched Grace's pale face, watched the paramedic monitoring her heart rate, and felt the entire careful architecture of his life beginning to collapse. At St. Mary's Hospital, the emergency room was bright and harsh and smelled of antiseptic. Grace was rushed behind double doors, and suddenly James and Aurelia were alone in the waiting area, surrounded by uncomfortable plastic chairs and the low murmur of other people's tragedies. Aurelia hadn't let go of his hand. Her fingers were small and cold, and she gripped him with a strength that seemed impossible for someone so young. Do you have other family? James asked gently, though he already knew the answer from the photos, from the apartment that told the story of two people surviving alone. Grandparents. An aunt or uncle. Aurelia shook her head, her eyes fixed on the double doors where her mother had disappeared. Just Mama. My daddy left before I was born. Mama says he couldn't handle having a baby who was different. And her parents. She paused, her voice getting even smaller. They wanted to send me away. To an institution, when I was a baby. They said Mama was ruining her life trying to take care of me. When she said no, they said they didn't have a daughter anymore. James felt something crack open inside his chest, the same feeling he'd had when he first saw her in the snow, but deeper now, more painful. This child, this brave little girl who'd navigated 4 blocks through a snowstorm to save her mother, had been considered a burden by her own grandparents. Something to be hidden away, discarded, erased. My Mama chose me, Aurelia continued, still staring at those doors. She gave up everything to choose me. Her family, her money, her school. Everything. She says I'm worth it, but sometimes... Her voice broke. Sometimes I think she was wrong. Sometimes I think everyone would be better if I'd never been born. No. The word came out sharp, more forceful than James intended. He turned Aurelia's wheelchair so she was facing him, crouched down so they were eye level. Listen to me, Aurelia. Your mother was right. You are worth everything. You are worth her sacrifice, worth her choice, worth every single moment. And anyone who can't see that, anyone who wanted to send you away, they're the ones who are wrong. Not you. Never you. Tears spilled down Aurelia's cheeks, and she reached for him with both arms. James pulled her close, feeling her small body shake with sobs against his expensive coat, and let his own carefully constructed walls finally begin to crumble. He'd spent 10 years building barriers between himself and feeling, between himself and connection, between himself and the pain of caring about anyone. In this moment, holding this child who'd already faced more rejection and hardship than most people experienced in a lifetime, James felt every one of those barriers crack and fall. And beneath them, he found something he'd forgotten existed, his own capacity to care, to protect, to choose someone else over his own comfort. A doctor appeared through the double doors, and James stood, his hand still holding Aurelia's. Family of Grace Whitmore. James looked down at Aurelia, then back at the doctor. Yes, he said. We're her family. The doctor's news was cautiously optimistic. Grace was stable, in cardiac intensive care, but she'd need surgery within the next 48 hours. Her heart had been failing for months, maybe longer, the damage compounded by stress, exhaustion, and untreated hypertension. She'd been ignoring symptoms because she couldn't afford to miss work, couldn't afford the specialist visits, couldn't afford to be anything less than fully functional for her daughter. She's lucky to be alive, the doctor said quietly. Another hour and we'd be having a very different conversation. James thanked him, his mind already racing through logistics, through the calls he'd need to make, the arrangements he'd need to handle. But before he could formulate a plan, another figure appeared in the waiting room. A woman in her 50s with kind but tired eyes, carrying a clipboard and wearing an ID badge that read Children's Services. Mr. Francis. She'd gotten his name from the admissions paperwork. I'm Carol Patterson, social worker with Child Protective Services. I need to speak with you about Aurelia's placement. James felt Aurelia's hand tighten in his, felt her entire body go rigid in the wheelchair beside him. Placement, he repeated carefully. Given Ms. Whitmore's condition and uncertain prognosis, and given Aurelia's significant care needs, her wheelchair, her medical requirements, her therapy schedule, will need to arrange temporary foster care. I have a call-in to a specialized facility that handles children with. No. The word came from Aurelia, barely a whisper but sharp with terror. No, please. Not a facility. Please. Mrs. Patterson's expression softened, but her voice remained professionally firm. Sweetheart, I know it sounds scary, but this facility is specifically equipped to care for children who need extra help. You'll have medical staff available, physical therapy, everything you need. No. Aurelia's voice was louder now, edged with panic. My friend Emma was in a facility. She said they tied her to the bed when she cried. She said they took away her communication device when she was bad. She said her breathing was coming faster, her eyes wide with genuine terror. I can't go there. I'll be good, I promise I'll be good, just please don't send me away. That's not happening. James heard his own voice, sharp and commanding, the voice he used in boardrooms when negotiations were going the wrong way. She's not going to any facility. Mrs. Patterson turned to him, her eyebrows raised. Mr. Francis, I understand your concern, but we have procedures. You're not family, you're not even an acquaintance. The state has protocols for situations exactly like this, and then I'll hire lawyers who can challenge those protocols. James was surprised by the intensity of his own reaction, by the fierce protective instinct that had risen up in him. This child had just saved her mother's life by being brave enough to ask a stranger for help. He wasn't going to let her be traumatized further by being sent to a place that terrified her. "I'll challenge every protocol you have. I'll tie this up in court for months if I have to. Mr. Francis. I'll become her temporary guardian. Right now. Tonight." He pulled out his phone, already scrolling through contacts. "I have lawyers on retainer. I have resources. I have a home that can be made accessible within 24 hours. What I don't have is any willingness to watch this child be taken away to a facility she's terrified of when there's another option." Mrs. Patterson studied him for a long moment. James could see the calculation happening behind her eyes, weighing procedures against practicality, regulations against the reality of a 7-year-old in crisis at nearly midnight. "You understand the responsibility you'd be taking on?" she asked quietly. "Aurelia requires significant daily care. Medication management, physical therapy, mobility assistance, specialized equipment. This isn't like babysitting a typical child. This is a commitment that would affect every aspect of your life." James looked down at Aurelia, at her tear-stained face and terrified eyes, at the trust she'd placed in him from that first moment in the snow. He thought about his penthouse apartment, his perfectly ordered life, his carefully maintained emotional distance from anything that might hurt him. He thought about all the reasons he should say no, should let the professionals handle it, should return to his safe, controlled existence. "I understand," he said. "And I'm willing." Mrs. Patterson sighed, then nodded slowly. "Let me make some calls. I can't promise anything, but given the circumstances, given that it's nearly midnight and Aurelia has been through significant trauma already." She paused, looking at Aurelia's terrified face. "Given everything, maybe we can arrange something temporary until Ms. Whitmore recovers." She walked away, phone already to her ear, and James felt Aurelia's grip on his hand slowly loosen. She looked up at him with something like wonder in her eyes. "You'd really do that?" she whispered. "You'd really take care of me?" James crouched down beside her wheelchair, meeting her eyes directly. "Yes," he said simply. "I really would." For the first time that night, Aurelia smiled. It was small and tentative and still edged with fear, but it was there. And in that moment, James understood that he'd just made a decision that would change everything. He was terrified. But he was also, for the first time in years, absolutely certain he was doing the right thing. James's penthouse apartment, which he'd always considered the pinnacle of sophisticated minimalism, revealed itself as a hostile environment within the first 30 seconds. The lobby entrance had 3 steps. The elevator opened to a narrow hallway with a decorative console table that left barely enough room for Aurelia's wheelchair to pass. His front door was 32 inches wide. The wheelchair needed 36. "It's okay," Aurelia said quietly as James stood staring at his own doorway in disbelief. "I can wait out here while you figure it out." "Absolutely not." James pulled out his phone, scrolling through contacts until he found his building manager. It was 2 in the morning. He didn't care. "I need contractors here by sunrise. I don't care what it costs." By noon the next day, his apartment was a construction zone. Workers were widening doorways, installing a temporary ramp over the front steps, reconfiguring the bathroom with grab bars and a roll-in shower. James had never seen money move so efficiently. Every problem had a solution if you threw enough resources at it. Except the problems weren't really about doorways and ramps. They were about everything James didn't know. "You have to lock the wheels first," Aurelia said patiently, watching him attempt to help her transfer from the wheelchair to the couch. "Otherwise it'll roll backwards and we'll both fall." James looked at the small levers on the wheels he'd never noticed before, feeling heat rise in his face. "Right. Of course. It's okay. Most people don't know. She demonstrated, flipping the levers with practiced ease. Now you put your hands under my arms, not around my waist, and I'll push up while you lift. On 3. 1, 2, 3. The transfer was awkward, clumsy, but successful. James found himself sweating despite the apartment's climate control. This was harder than any merger negotiation he'd ever conducted. The medication schedule was worse. Grace had left detailed notes in her red folder, but the reality was overwhelming. Morning pills with food. Evening pills without food. One medication that couldn't be taken within 4 hours of another. Aurelia's antispasm medication that made her drowsy if the timing was wrong. Her supplements. Her pain management. You gave me the blue one twice, Aurelia said gently on the second morning, looking at the pills James had carefully arranged. The blue one is only at bedtime. The green one is what goes with breakfast. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. James felt inadequate in a way he'd never experienced. He'd built a commercial empire. He'd negotiated billion-dollar deals. He couldn't keep track of a 7-year-old's medication schedule. It's okay. I know which ones are which. I can help you. She pointed to each bottle, explaining the purpose, the timing, the side effects to watch for. Her knowledge was encyclopedic, her patience infinite. This child had been managing her own complex medical needs for years, teaching adults how to help her because she had no choice. The physical therapy routine was humbling in different ways. Aurelia needed daily stretches to prevent her muscles from tightening, exercises to maintain what mobility she had. James watched videos on his phone, trying to follow along, his large hands clumsy compared to Grace's practice movements. You're pulling too hard, Aurelia said, wincing. Just gentle pressure. It shouldn't hurt. I don't want to hurt you. You won't if you listen when I tell you what I need. She looked at him seriously. That's the most important thing, Mr. James. Listen to me. I know my body better than anyone. I know what hurts and what helps and what I can do and what I can't. Over those first days, James discovered layers to Aurelia he'd never imagined. Her sharp wit that made him laugh despite his exhaustion. Her intelligence that showed in the books she read, the questions she asked, the observations she made about his apartment and his life. Her complete lack of self-pity, even when things were difficult. Why do people always look so sad when they see my wheelchair? She asked one afternoon while he was making lunch. Your face did it too, that first night. Like it's the worst thing that ever happened. James paused, considering his words carefully. I think people don't understand. They see limitations instead of adaptations. It's just how I move, Aurelia said simply. Like you move with legs, I move with wheels. It's not sad. It's just different. She spun her wheelchair in a quick circle, demonstrating. Actually, I can spin way faster than you can. And I never get tired feet. James found himself smiling. That's true. I never thought of it that way. Most people don't. She rolled over to the window, looking out at the city below. But maybe now you will. Maybe you'll see other people with wheelchairs and think, there goes someone who can spin really fast, instead of thinking it sad. In that moment, watching this extraordinary child who'd been teaching him patience and perspective and what real courage looked like, James understood something fundamental. He wasn't rescuing Aurelia. She was teaching him how to be human again. Grace woke fully on the third day, groggy from surgery but alert enough to panic when she didn't see Aurelia immediately. James watched from the doorway as the nurses calmed her, explaining what had happened, that her daughter was safe, that she'd had emergency cardiac surgery to repair damage that had been building for years. Where is she? Grace's voice was hoarse, desperate. "Where's my baby?" "She's with me," James said, stepping forward. "She's safe. I'm James Francis. Your daughter found me the night you collapsed." Grace's eyes fixed on him, confused and wary. "I don't understand. Where is she right now?" "With my assistant at my apartment, doing her afternoon therapy exercises. I can call them right now if you'd like to see her on video." He did, and the relief that flooded Grace's face when she saw Aurelia waving from the screen, smiling and safe, nearly broke his heart. After the call ended, Grace turned to him with tears streaming down her cheeks. "I don't know how to thank you. I don't even understand why you helped us." "Your daughter is remarkable," James said simply. "She saved your life. And maybe mine too." Over the following days, as Grace regained her strength, James visited every afternoon while Aurelia napped. In those quiet hospital room conversations, Grace's story emerged piece by piece, painful and beautiful in equal measure. She'd been 23, finishing her doctorate in physical therapy with a specialty in pediatric rehabilitation. Engaged to a fellow student, planning a future. Then Aurelia was born 6 weeks early, and the diagnosis came within hours, a spinal condition that would require lifelong management that would likely mean she'd never walk. "David left before she was even out of the NICU," Grace said quietly, staring at her hands. "Said he couldn't handle it. Couldn't handle having a disabled child, couldn't handle the responsibility, couldn't handle any of it. Just gone." Her parents had been worse. They'd come to the hospital with pamphlets for residential facilities, places that would take care of the situation so Grace could get back to her normal life. When she refused, when she insisted on bringing her daughter home, on being her mother, they'd given her an ultimatum. The baby or the family. "I chose Aurelia," Grace said, and despite the tears, her voice was steady. "I've never regretted it. Not once. Not even when." She gestured at the hospital room, at the evidence of her failing body. "Not even now." She dropped out of school, gotten work as a therapy assistant, spent every free moment researching Aurelia's condition, finding specialists, learning techniques. She'd worked double and triple shifts to afford the equipment, the therapy, the adapted clothing and toys that would give her daughter the best possible life. "I was managing," Grace continued. "It was hard, but we were okay. Until about 6 months ago. I started having chest pains, shortness of breath. I knew something was wrong, but I couldn't afford to miss work for doctor's appointments. Couldn't afford the testing. So I just..." She closed her eyes. "I ignored it. Took over-the-counter pain medication. Told myself it was stress." "And your heart medication?" James asked quietly. Grace's silence was answer enough. She'd been rationing it, making 1 month's supply last 3, using the money she saved to pay for Aurelia's new leg braces, for the adaptive equipment she needed. "She deserves everything," Grace whispered. "She's so smart, so funny, so brave. She deserves every opportunity, every chance. What I needed didn't matter compared to what she needed." James found himself telling her about his own mother then, about watching her work herself to exhaustion to give him opportunities, about the guilt he'd carried, the walls he'd built after she died, about his ex-wife, Sarah, who'd left him 2 years ago. "She said I was incapable of real connection," James heard himself say. "That I'd built this fortress around myself where nothing could touch me. That I chose work over everything because it was safe, because deals don't hurt you the way people can." He paused. She was right. "And now?" Grace asked. James thought about Aurelia teaching him to lock wheelchair wheels, patiently explaining her medication schedule, laughing as she demonstrated how fast she could spin. He thought about how his chest tightened every time she looked at him with trust in her eyes, how terrified he was of failing her, how that terror meant he was finally feeling something real again. "Now I'm learning that connection is worth the risk," he said. "That caring about someone, even when it's scary, even when you might lose them, it's what makes us human." Grace reached out and took his hand. Her grip was weak, but her gaze was strong. "Thank you," she said. "For seeing her. For seeing us. Most people look away." "I know," James said, remembering Aurelia's words in the snow. "They looked at my wheelchair and looked away. But not anymore. Not ever again." In the quiet of that hospital room, two broken people who'd sacrificed everything for others found something neither had expected: understanding, and the beginning of hope that maybe survival didn't have to mean doing it all alone. Grace's discharge day arrived 2 weeks after that snowy night that had changed everything. James sat in the uncomfortable hospital chair, watching her pack a few belongings, and felt his heart hammering in a way that had nothing to do with medical emergencies. He'd spent the past 3 days rehearsing this conversation in his mind, running through projections and proposals the way he would for any business venture. Except this wasn't business. This was something far more important, and he was terrified of getting it wrong. "Grace, I have a proposition," he said as she folded the robe Aurelia had picked out for her. "And I need you to hear me out completely before you say no." She turned to him, wariness in her eyes. "James, you've already done so much. You've cared for Aurelia, arranged for my medical bills to be handled, given us more than we could ever." "I'm not finished." He stood, needing to move, to channel the nervous energy. "For the past 2 weeks I've been learning. Not just about wheelchair accessibility or medication schedules, but about an entire world I never paid attention to. A world where buildings are designed wrong, where products don't work, where millions of people face barriers every single day that they shouldn't have to face." Grace listened quietly, her hands still on the robe. "You specialized in pediatric rehabilitation. You understand accessibility from both a clinical and personal perspective. You know what works and what doesn't, what helps and what just looks good on paper." He pulled out his tablet, showing her the documents his team had prepared. "I want you to lead a new division of my company. Accessibility technology and inclusive design. Real solutions, not token gestures. Products and technologies that actually help people live fuller lives." "James, I don't have a degree. I didn't finish." "You have something better than a degree. You have lived experience and professional expertise. You understand this in ways no textbook could teach." He sat down across from her, needing her to see his sincerity. The salary would be competitive. More than competitive. Full benefits, flexible hours so you can be there for Aurelia. You could work from home most days, come into the office when you choose. Grace was shaking her head, but he pressed on. "There's more. I own a building in Riverside Park. I've been holding it as an investment, but I want to retrofit it as a model of universal design. Wider doorways, accessible units, adaptive technology integrated throughout. The penthouse apartment, 3 bedrooms, fully accessible, views of the park, it's yours. No rent." "I can't possibly." "Let me finish." James leaned forward. "Here's what I need you to understand, Grace. This isn't charity. This isn't me trying to rescue you or assuage some guilt. This is me recognizing that you and Aurelia have expertise and perspective that could change lives. Real lives. Millions of them." He took a breath, feeling the walls he'd built for so long completely crumbled now. "That night in the snow, when Aurelia found me, I was on my way to another empty evening in another empty year. I'd spent a decade building an empire and forgetting how to be a person. I'd convinced myself that success meant control, that strength meant never needing anyone, that being invulnerable was the same as being powerful. His voice caught, and he didn't try to hide it. Aurelia showed me what real strength is. Not control. Not invulnerability. But the courage to face each day even when it's hard, to ask for help even when you're scared, to keep going even when everyone tells you to give up. She navigated 4 blocks through a snowstorm in a wheelchair because her mother needed her. That's strength. That's courage. Grace's eyes were bright with tears. You both saved me from a life that was successful but meaningless. You showed me that connection is worth the risk, that caring about people is what makes us human, that the real measure of a life isn't what you accumulate but who you help and who helps you back. He looked at her directly. So I'm not offering charity. I'm offering partnership. I'm offering you a chance to use everything you've learned, everything you've lived, to make the world more accessible for people like Aurelia. And I'm offering myself a chance to be part of something that actually matters. Grace was crying now, and James waited, giving her time. Finally, she spoke. I need to pay rent. Even if it's minimal. And I need to know I'm earning this position, not just being given it. I need to contribute, not just receive. Deal, James said immediately. Rent will be market rate for an accessible apartment, which given the limited inventory is about half what I'd charge for a standard unit. And you'll be earning your position. I'll expect results, quarterly reports, innovative thinking. This won't be easy work. Grace laughed through her tears, and extended her hand. Then I accept. James took her hand, and felt the final pieces of his old life fall away, replaced by something infinitely more valuable. Purpose, connection, and the extraordinary privilege of being part of this makeshift family's future. 6 months later, James found himself sitting on metal bleachers at the Riverside Adaptive Sports Center, surrounded by parents and siblings and friends, all of them cheering with an enthusiasm that would have seemed excessive to the man he used to be. The air smelled of rubber and determination, and the sound of racing wheelchairs on the track was like thunder. Grace sat beside him, her color healthy now, her movements easy and unrestricted. Regular medication, reduced stress, and proper medical care had worked small miracles. She was 3 months into leading the accessibility division, and her first product, an affordable adaptive gaming controller, was already in production. She'd testified before the city council twice about accessible design standards. She'd found her voice, and it was powerful. There she is, Grace said, pointing to lane 4 where Aurelia sat poised in her racing chair, a sleek machine that James had spent weeks researching before presenting it to her for her 8th birthday. She wore a purple jersey with a number 7, her long hair pulled back in a determined braid, her face set with fierce concentration. The starting gun fired, and the racers exploded forward. James found himself on his feet immediately, shouting encouragement alongside everyone else, his careful professional composure completely abandoned. Aurelia's arms pumped in powerful rhythm, her technique improving with each weekly practice. She wasn't the fastest. 2 girls pulled ahead early, their movements honed by years of competition, but she didn't quit, didn't slow, pushed through with relentless determination. She crossed the finish line in 4th place, breathing hard, sweat on her forehead, and the smile on her face was absolutely radiant. James cheered louder than anyone, his voice hoarse, his hands stinging from clapping. Grace was crying happy tears beside him, and when Aurelia rolled over to the bleachers, they both met her at the rail. Did you see? Did you see? Aurelia was breathless with excitement. I beat my personal best by 3 seconds. 3 whole seconds. You were incredible, James said, and meant it with every fiber of his being. Absolutely incredible. His phone buzzed in his pocket. Then again. Then a 3rd time. He ignored it, focused on Aurelia's joy, on Grace's proud smile, on this moment that mattered more than any meeting ever could. Later, After Aurelia had collected her participation medal and congratulated the winners and made plans with her teammates for next week's practice, they went to dinner at a restaurant Aurelia had chosen. It was small, family-owned, with accessible seating and a menu that catered to various dietary needs. The kind of place James would never have noticed 6 months ago. In the bathroom while washing his hands, James finally looked at his phone. 7 missed calls. 12 text messages. An acquisition offer for one of his properties that would net him $8 million, but required a decision by tomorrow morning. 6 months ago, he would have left the restaurant immediately, would have spent the evening with his lawyers, would have prioritized the deal over everything else. He silenced his phone and returned to the table, where Aurelia was animatedly describing her race to the waitress, who listened with genuine interest. Grace caught his eye and smiled, a question in her expression. "Work?" she asked quietly. "Nothing that can't wait until tomorrow," James said, and realized he meant it. Aurelia reached for his hand across the table, her grip strong and sure, no longer the terrified child in the snow but a confident young girl who knew her own worth and wasn't afraid to chase her dreams. On his other side, Grace's presence was steady and warm, a partnership built on mutual respect and shared purpose. Sarah had been right. James understood now. The man he'd been was incapable of real connection, too armored in success to let anyone close. But that man had died on a snowy street 6 months ago when a brave little girl in a wheelchair had asked for help and he'd chosen to answer. The man he'd become understood that true wealth wasn't measured in properties or acquisitions or profit margins. It was measured in moments like this: Aurelia's laugh as she demonstrated her racing technique with her dinner fork, Grace's contented smile, the warmth of belonging to something larger than himself. It was measured in the extraordinary privilege of being chosen by this family, of choosing them back, of building a life where showing up mattered more than standing out, where connection trumped control, where love, messy and complicated and absolutely essential, was the only currency that actually counted. Outside, snow began to fall again, quiet and soft, each flake catching the streetlight. But this time, James wasn't alone in the cold. This time, he was exactly where he belonged.